It's hard to believe now, but the United States and Iran were once close allies. Americans in Tehran were welcomed as teachers, engineers, and advisors. Iranians admired America's democracy and independence, seeing it as a model for their own nation. In the early 20th century, Iran sought to modernize and saw the US as a partner, not a colonizer. When American advisor Morgan Schuster arrived in 1911 to help organize Iran's finances, he was hailed as a hero. This goodwill built a deep trust. Iranians believed America was on their side, a protector against old European empires. During World War II, the US occupied Iran alongside Britain and the Soviet Union, but was seen as a temporary guest. President Roosevelt's visit to Tehran and his support for Iran's independence reinforced this friendship. After the war, American pressure helped force Soviet troops out of northern Iran, proving to many Iranians that America could be trusted. This era of cooperation now feels like a distant dream. The warmth has been replaced by hostility. The story of how this happened is complex, a tale of betrayal, revolution, and misunderstanding. Two nations that once saw the best in each other are now locked in animosity. To understand the present, we must look back to the moment it all began to unravel. The turning point was a single fateful event in the summer of 1953. It was an event that would poison the well of friendship forever. The seeds of today's conflict were planted then, shaping our world for decades to come. The headlines today are filled with talk of conflict, sanctions, and threats. But once there was genuine partnership. That history is essential to understanding what came next. Let's go back to where it all changed. The breakdown began with oil. For decades, Iran's oil was controlled by the British, who reaped the profits while Iran got little. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry, igniting national pride and British fury. Britain imposed a blockade, crippling Iran's economy, and turned to the US for help. At first, President Truman hesitated, seeing it as British colonialism. But the Eisenhower administration, obsessed with the Cold War, saw Mossadegh as a potential communist threat. British intelligence convinced the CIA that Mossadegh was dangerous. The CIA launched Operation Ajax, a covert plan to overthrow Iran's elected government. Agent Kermit Roosevelt Jr. arrived in Tehran with cash, bribing politicians, army officers, and the press. The CIA staged protests and spread disinformation, painting Mossadegh as a communist and enemy of Islam. For days, the plan seemed to fail. Mossadegh discovered the plot, and the Shah fled. But the CIA doubled down. On August 19, 1953, their paid mobs and military conspirators succeeded. Mossadegh was arrested. The Shah returned, now an absolute ruler. The coup was a success for the US and Britain, but a disaster for Iranian democracy. This single act destroyed trust and set the stage for decades of resentment. Iranians never forgot that their democracy was toppled by foreign hands. The US gained an ally, but lost its reputation as a friend. The seeds of future conflict were sown. The Shah's rule would bring modernization and repression. The consequences would echo for generations. The friendship was broken. The story was only beginning. With Mossadegh gone, the Shah ruled with American support. The US poured money and weapons into Iran, making the Shah a key ally. On the surface, Iran modernized. Tehran became glamorous, reforms expanded education and women's rights. The Shah projected an image of prosperity and progress, but beneath the glitter, his rule was a dictatorship. The secret police, Savak, brutally crushed dissent, filling prisons with political opponents. Torture and fear became widespread. Many Iranians saw the Shah's modernization as a betrayal of their culture and values. The gap between rich and poor widened. The Shah's close ties to the US became a source of shame, not pride. He was seen as a puppet, serving foreign interests. Resentment simmered, a volcano waiting to erupt. The gilded cage was beautiful, but it was still a cage. The stage was set for revolution. The pressure was about to explode. The anger found its voice in Ayatollah Khomeini, an exiled cleric whose sermons smuggled into Iran inspired millions. He condemned the Shah's corruption and subservience to America, promising an independent Islamic Iran. In 1978, protests erupted nationwide. The Shah's forces responded with violence, but each crackdown fueled more outrage. Funerals became protests. The movement grew unstoppable. Millions united, students, workers, conservatives, demanding the Shah's overthrow. The US was caught off guard, failing to grasp the depth of hatred for the regime it had supported. Washington's indecision only worsened the crisis. The Shah, ill and losing resolve, left Iran in January 1979. 2 weeks later, Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. The monarchy collapsed almost overnight. The revolution succeeded. Iran became an Islamic republic under Khomeini. The world watched in disbelief. A 500-year-old monarchy was gone. The US lost its closest ally in the region. A new era, uncertain and volatile, had begun. The friendship was over. The enmity was just beginning. After the revolution, suspicion of the US ran deep in Iran. When President Carter allowed the exiled Shah into America for medical treatment, many Iranians saw it as a threat. On November 4, 1979, radical students stormed the US Embassy in Tehran, taking diplomats hostage. They demanded the Shah's extradition and the return of his wealth. Khomeini quickly endorsed the takeover, calling it a second revolution. The crisis gripped America. Nightly news counted the days. Images of blindfolded hostages haunted the nation. Diplomatic efforts failed. A rescue mission ended in disaster. The hostages were held for 444 days, released only as Ronald Reagan took office. The crisis humiliated the US and shattered any remaining trust. For Iranians, it was a symbol of defiance. Hardliners in Tehran consolidated power. The last ties between the two countries were severed. The friendship was not just broken, it was shattered. The scars would last for generations. The US and Iran became bitter enemies. The world had changed. There was no going back. The end of the hostage crisis marked the start of a bitter Cold War between the US and Iran. The US labeled Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. Diplomatic ties were cut. The Iran-Iraq War erupted in 1980. The US tilted toward Saddam Hussein, providing support even as Iraq used chemical weapons. For Iranians, this was another betrayal. The conflict spilled into the Persian Gulf. US and Iranian forces clashed. In 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian airliner, killing 290 civilians. The US called it a mistake. Iranians saw it as barbarism. The US accused Iran of supporting terrorism, especially Hezbollah. The 1983 bombing of the US Marine barracks in Beirut hardened American attitudes. Sanctions became the main US tool, crippling Iran's economy but fueling resentment. Decades of hostility, sanctions, and proxy wars followed. Each side saw the other as the enemy. The cycle of mistrust deepened. The wounds of the past never healed. The rivalry only grew. In the 2000s, Iran's nuclear program became the new flashpoint. Secret facilities were revealed, raising alarm in Washington. Iran insisted its program was peaceful, but years of secrecy fueled suspicion. President Bush labeled Iran part of the axis of evil. The US feared a nuclear-armed Iran would destabilize the region. Sanctions tightened, military threats loomed. A covert war began, cyber attacks like Stuxnet, and assassinations of Iranian scientists. For Iran, the nuclear program became a symbol of resistance. The standoff brought the two countries to the brink of war. The nuclear issue became the central flashpoint. Old grievances mixed with new dangers. The rivalry reached a new, terrifying level. The world watched anxiously. In 2015, diplomacy brought a breakthrough, the Iran nuclear deal. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. For a moment, there was hope, but the deal was controversial in both countries. Critics in the US said it didn't go far enough. Hardliners in Iran distrusted American promises. In 2018, President Trump withdrew from the deal, reimposing harsh sanctions. Iran began exceeding nuclear limits. The brief optimism vanished. The two countries were once again on a collision course. The glimmer of hope was extinguished. The cycle of confrontation resumed. The rivalry endured. The world braced for what might come next. Today, the US-Iran relationship remains fraught and dangerous. The story began with a struggle over oil and sovereignty, not religion. The 1953 coup destroyed trust. The 1979 revolution was the backlash. The hostage crisis cemented enmity. For decades, the two countries have clashed through war, sanctions, and proxy battles. The brief hope of the nuclear deal proved fleeting. This rivalry fuels instability across the Middle East and affects the world. Oil prices, regional conflicts, and global diplomacy are all shaped by this standoff. The nuclear question remains unresolved, a constant threat. The story of the US and Iran is a cautionary tale. Unaddressed grievances can fester for generations. Actions taken in secret can have consequences that echo for decades. The ghosts of 1953 and 1979 still haunt the present. The challenge of finding peace remains urgent and unfinished.